DJ Chark, he was really good down the stretch. The last, when they were winning games and almost made the playoffs, he was, his classic, 17 and a half yards per reception, stretching the field, doing the things he can do as a 6'4", 4.34 guy. And the reason why I think it could be a value is everyone's knocking this draft class at wide receiver also, which I get. And in particular, the one thing that does not have is there's just not speed really at this position. If he stays healthy, he just brings an element that I think nobody else on the market brings.
Welcome to the Unexpected Points podcast. I am your host, Kevin Cole. Today, I'm going to be joined by a distinguished guest, Brad Spielberger of PFF. I love Brad. I love the work he's doing. We agree on a lot in this episode, but he also illuminates quite a lot when it comes to free agency. So we're going to talk free agency, offensive, defensive positions, what's going on with the guys left at quarterback. We'll also get into a little bit of the quarterback contracts that I hadn't discussed yet. So Carr, Geno, and Daniel Jones and what we think about those deals. If anyone's wondering about a Lamar Jackson take, I did do a solo pod earlier this week that you should check out where I go into all the ins and outs and all my thoughts on Lamar Jackson there. If you want to follow Brad on Twitter at PFF_Brad, fantastic information here across the board here. And again, he's probably like top two sort of guys, and I don't even know in which order between Jason Fitzgerald and Brad. Maybe Brad would edge Jason a little bit as far as this is like his full-time job. But I love both of those guys as far as being able to go over everything. Actually, I don't even want to say they're tied. They're tied because Jason's so good at everything else. I can't make a decision here. But one of the most informative guys you can talk to and get us ready here for free agency, pointing out guys who we think are going to be values potentially, guys who are overvalued, and talk about some thematic things by the positions in free agency and what you should be looking for. If you're not subscribed to this pod, please do so. If you are not subscribed to my Substack, unexpectedpoints.substack.com, please go check it out because I got some good information there, not only on projections for all of the free agency class, combine, all of that stuff, which drills matter, which drills don't matter. I am going to put out my offseason improvement index is going to launch on Monday, which I had done before at PFF. And it basically looks at all of the different additions, subtractions, trades in the offseason, how that affects teams. And I'm going to do it on a point basis, looking at my NFL plus minus valuation calculation. Also improving that a little bit there by adding in draft picks, which honestly are not that important. Rookies are not that important in their first year in the NFL. But it's going to look at all that and try to get an estimation of how much teams are going to improve on a point basis year over year versus their roster at the end of last season. So that'll be coming out. And then, of course, as we get further and further into the draft, I've already started compiling all of my data to do wide receiver, running back, tight end, quarterback projections and rankings for how I would rank those guys with real NFL value and also from a fantasy football perspective. All right, everybody, let's get into the content here. Let's get to my man, Brad Spielberger. All right, welcome to the pod, Brad. Let's talk free agency. You're the free agency man. This is your time of year. This is your time to shine. I want some of that light to flow its way over to the Unexpected Points podcast. So I appreciate you joining me, first of all. Second, let's talk agenda for this episode here. So I went over this a little bit with you beforehand, but I can lay it out for everyone here. We're going to talk quarterback some, and then we'll go into the other non-quarterback positions, maybe values or guys who we think may be overpaid offensively, defensively. And then I'm going to talk about it, of course, from a macro sort of perspective, everything else. So, but before we start, I have to ask you, are your legs sore this week from all those victory laps you've been taking all week long? I just want to make sure you're seated, right? So you're okay. You can stand up through this episode.
I'm sitting down. Yeah, Danny Dimes was the true bullseye. Geno, obviously, as we've now seen, was which I did say in my tweet in the victory lap. Like I knew that was not the actual base value.
Yeah, you got Schultzed. That's what I'm saying.
I got Schultz. Yeah, but at least I knew. Yeah, at least
as an insider now, you're part of the insider game. What happens when like the Schefters of the world or the Rappaports, they got Schultz, like they got Schultz big time, in my opinion, because this is my idea. My idea is like they see that they're like, oh, fuck, like I got to do something on this. Maybe they talk to whoever was talking to Jordan Schultz, Gino's agent, whoever it is, and they kind of maybe run with it a little bit more quickly than they would otherwise or with less confirmation because of the fact that they had gotten Schultz. Do you think that's possible?
I think it's true. Not like calling him out or anything, but Garofalo did confirm that actual 3-year, 105 million. Where, like you said, if he was first, but here's the thing though. Yes, I'm in the insider game, but I would never do that, and I think they know that. So I'm never going to get a lot of these scoops because I would be like, well, what's the actual base value? What does the contract actually look like? And that's not going to help me earn a lot of favors from agents. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like the whole Geno story. I mean, I've been a bit of a Geno hater. Well, it's not that I'm a hater. Like I'm a hater of people. I'm a hater of like overreactions in any sort of direction. So even when it comes to Geno generally and the Geno love fest, I mean, I'm happy for him. I'm glad that he got it. I wonder how many people out there though, like even realize the structure of this contract might make it like a coin flip that they draft a quarterback here and then like all the Geno love is like, all this thing we believe in Geno's our guy, Geno this, Geno that. Like it's basically going to be like, okay, he's got the starting job for like 5 weeks potentially if they draft a quarterback.
Now that all the details are out, he got less than the franchise tag, and it could turn into a 1-year, $28 million deal with a little bit of dead cap, but not enough dead cap to make you not move on. I think he'll get a season, and then 2024 is entirely up in the air. And I really do think Seattle, like, there's a good chance that they take a quarterback. They don't really hide their moves a lot of the time. They're picking top 5. Pete Carroll's met with every single guy at the combine.
He's vibing.
Yeah, I mean, I think
he's vibing with all of these guys.
Vibing with them all, unlike Sauce Gardner, apparently. They have beef now. But yeah, no, it doesn't
I missed
that.
Wait, what's the Sauce Gardner beef? Break it. And that's not. I know I should know this stuff, but what's the Sauce Gardner beef?
He said that Pete Carroll sat too close to him during their interview last year. It was like a weird thing. So then Pete Carroll,
he's old. Maybe he can't hear. Maybe he can't hear that well.
That's
give him
probably
a break.
Decent. I mean, he's 70 years old. He's probably been yelling at the top of his lungs for 50 years. But and then Pete Carroll's Twitter, which I doubt is him, put out a tweet of like pictures of the interview where he's sitting like across the room. And then Sauce quote tweeted that and was like, your social media team picked out a couple, like, whatever, like, so like it's not an actual beef.
Wait, did they draw those lines to tell whether or
they
not
should have done the relationship lines?
Who's the alpha and who was the beta in this? Maybe he was trying to cuck. Was he trying to cuck Sauce Gardner? There's a possibility there.
It's a good question, but hey, they got 3-1. They're happy. Everyone's happy, but yeah, it's a funny random beef going on Twitter right now.
That is a funny random beef. I like the Dion type of move. You should have done the Dion move where it's like, where are you drafting again? Okay, no, I'm not going to be meet with you in the first place. Right. Like I'm not wasting my time with this meeting. I like that, like when you just deny everything beforehand. Okay, so sorry, we got off track here. But because I was thinking about Geno coming into this thing. Whatever. I think about it too much because it never happens. But I was like, okay, if Geno really wants a lot of money, could you like transition tag him? Because I like getting feedback from the rest of the NFL. But it seems like Geno made this pretty easy, honestly. Like there was no reason to do any sort of tag if you're going to be able to do this sort of deal.
Was clearly very confident that there was not someone who's going to pay him more than they were. They didn't even have to go to a transition tag. And I know he made it easy. They had all the leverage in the world because he had about $17 million in career earnings before this offseason. His signing bonus alone is more than that, right? So he just doubled his career earnings. Like it's still great for him in a vacuum, but he couldn't, drive a hard bargain like a Daniel Jones, like a Derek Carr, because if Seattle said, yeah, you know what, then fine, whatever, we'll go a different direction. Like there was a chance that no team steps up and maybe he gets, kind of like a 1-year flyer incentive heavy type deal. So he couldn't take that risk. I think he and his group realized that. I'm not knocking them for the deal. I think they took about as much as they could. The incentives are pretty lofty as well. I think it's going to be hard for him to earn a lot of them. But that's the leverage you get when a guy has been a journeyman for the last 8 years.
Yeah, and I also think from Geno's perspective, I mean, I think it's a fantastic deal for the Seahawks. But at the same time, I don't think it's a bad deal for Geno. And if he has positive feelings about everything, if he just wants to get it done and have this locked in, and if he plays well, if they draft a quarterback, again, this scenario, and he continues to look okay during the first 5-6 weeks of the season, next year, if they let him go or if they want to trade him, someone may pick him up, and he still is like in that realm of being a starter elsewhere. So I don't think it like imperils his ability to be a starter elsewhere. In fact, taking a more modest contract might actually help facilitate something if they decide to trade him later on. Now let's talk about these other guys, because I'm not too much of a fan of these other contracts. I mean, I think the Geno deal was a good like win-win from my perspective. Again, Geno probably could have extracted maybe a little bit more if he tried to play hardball. You never know, because maybe the Seahawks would have got a little nervous about who knows who they're going to get in the draft if they really felt like all the quarterbacks could potentially be gone at that point. I don't know. I don't know which one of the deals I like less, the Carr deal or the Jones deal. Let's talk Carr first, as that was the first one to drop. When I see these deals like Carr's, I'm just like, who are you really bidding against in this circumstance? Yeah. Because the Jets are there, but we know that the Jets, like, it's a clear second choice. And I guess just from the perspective of the Saints overall, yeah, Dalton's definitely a downgrade. I get it. The division stinks. So maybe that's your play there, is to try to win the division. But I feel like there's a bit of this like principal agent problem going on there in particular here, where you have Dennis Allen and Mickey Loomis to a degree. I don't know, maybe Mickey Loomis has enough goodwill where it doesn't matter that much, but to have to really wash out this franchise is going to be tough. And if they can get Carr and they can make the playoffs, it kind of like extends your timeline for those guys, even if they're probably significantly overpaying on this deal.
I almost think it's in ways a favor to Dennis Allen, who was Carr's head coach when he was a rookie. And I thought Allen was a borderline getting fired type of guy this offseason. And now you're giving him, and look, it's 2 years, $60 million, realistically, probably 2 years, $70 million, because he'll have some guarantees kick in, which, is fine. But yeah, it's just like, I mean, Seth Galino, who's our quarterback guru, said Andy Dalton played better than Carr last year anyway. Like, it's not like it's some massive upgrade. So yeah, but that's the thing, is they look at the division and they think, hey, we can go 9-8 and make the playoffs and host a playoff game. And I'll say this too, talk about principal agent problem. In this scenario, I actually don't think it is. The owner in New Orleans wants to win as many games as possible every single season and does not have a long-term outlook. Just wants to have fans be excited, be in the building, and chasing 9-8 is fine with her. And so, GMs and coaches, I'm not trying to like excuse their actions, but they do what the owner says. I mean, at the end of the day, and I think she does just want to spend always, and so they just keep doing that.
Okay, well, if that's the goal, A++ for the Saints. Right. The goal is win now and do everything. I have to say they're really knocking it out of the park there. Okay, the thing that worries me about this Carr contract, as you're saying, there are some like protections against the fact if they need to get out of it early, maybe they can. And this is going to be true of Daniel Jones, we'll talk about too. Whenever you have a cap hit jump nearly 30 million year over year, which happens between year 1 and year 2 on this deal, it goes for 7.2 million to 35.7 million the next year. It incentivizes these teams to potentially restructure, and that means you're going to lock yourself in even longer. If we look at Daniel Jones, we could talk about this in the context of Jones too. For Daniel Jones, I think it goes up from like 16 million to 45 million or something like that.
It's so 21 in year 1, but yeah, it probably jumps. Yeah.
You're right. 21 to 45. So it goes up from 21. And they have a ton of cap space this year, right? They have a ton of cap space. They're gonna, well, not a ton, but they have decent amount of cap space. They're going to create some more with Kenny Golladay and other guys being gone. So the cap situation might be a little tighter next year if they sign some guys this offseason. And Daniel Jones's number is going to go up 24 million. What about that? The restructure risk in these deals. That also, we have a questionable quarterback, and you might be locking yourself into a restructure a la like Tannehill, although I think I like Tannehill better than these guys in a way. It could be dicey.
Yeah, I mean, Jones just signed a very similar contract to Dak Prescott, 4 years, 160. The details are a little bit different, but, there was basically a built-in restructure in the second year, which happened in Dallas and might happen in New York. And even forgetting external free agents, I mean, Dexter Lawrence is going to get over $20 million a year this offseason, if I had to guess. Right. And then next offseason, it could be this offseason, but I think they'll wait. Andrew Thomas, if he plays like he did this past year, is going to get over $20 million a year at left tackle as well. So very quickly, yeah, they do have a lot of resources right now. They cleared their books. I think they were smart last offseason. They overperformed what they honestly tried to do. But yeah, the cap space can dry up real quick if you all of a sudden are paying, three dudes a combined, $80 million plus per year.
And I also think this could be a situation, at least the rumblings are out there. Again, I'm not as connected. You're my connected guy, so I'll come to you on this. When we talk about ownership always lurking there in the background, that has a much higher influence than any of us think. When it comes to Daniel Jones and how this like Jones, Saquon tag played out, which was also the case for Tannehill and Derrick Henry to a degree, but they were able to get Derrick Henry on a deal beforehand. Like I think ownership, supposedly, all the rumblings are ownership just loves Daniel Jones. And they might say, rather than tag the guy, which seems like the clear, correct thing to do, not only do they want to be able to retain Saquon with the tag, but on top of that, I don't think they want to haggle with this guy. I think they want to give him what they believe to be is a fair contract in their mind and lock this guy in. And he's like their type of guy when it comes to ownership also.
Oh, I can tell you this. I know the new regime came in. They obviously declined the fifth-year option for a reason,
Yes.
and didn't really believe in Daniel Jones. I can tell you, Dable and Shane, over the course of the year, they did buy in. Like they really did. They got won over. I honestly think the same thing happened in Chicago, where they were flexible. Their mind was open, and they changed their opinion through the course of the year. Which, should you base it off one season? Probably not. But I do think at the end that, the Mara family probably put their thumb on the scale a little bit and said, get this deal done. We want him to be here. And look, I get the franchise tag probably, in my opinion, still was the correct route, but two tags would have been about $72 million. So they give him $82 million over 2 years, which is, the worst case scenario, or I guess best case, whatever. So, an extra $10 million. And then, of course, yes, they want to tag Saquon. He is still the face of the franchise, even with a quote unquote franchise quarterback now. And I do think, look, they want to win football games. That is, the MO, but optics and media stuff and like that there is value in that from Saquon Barkley, whether we think that's, like kind of silly or not, because all we care about is winning. It matters to the owners.
Yeah. No, yeah. Again, this is just, to me, well, it looks a little bit better now because when I originally looked at this, I think it was being reported that an additional $12 million of the 2025 base salary guaranteed in March of 2024, but now I think it's actually 2025.
Yep.
So that means 282 is still not 294, right?
Correct. I had the same thing. I thought it was next season. It's actually in 2025. So there's the get out of 282 is not terrible.
Yeah, it's not terrible there. At the same time, I guess if I'm looking at this from a purely like optimal sort of way, I might not mind throwing some extra dollars at Saquon Barkley to sign him, and then franchise tagging Daniel Jones. Also, one factor in that is I don't think he's as valuable of a player, but like the Christian McCaffrey trade, midseason trade, like if you just throw a bunch of money at, it's not a bunch of money, relative. We're talking about running backs here. So if you throw like a bunch of running back money at Saquon, if things aren't going well, and I'm thinking about scenarios, like the worst case scenario for the Giants is midway through this season, things aren't going well. They weren't that great last year anyway. You have Daniel Jones locked in. You don't know what to do with him. You're going to have to pay him. He's going to have a cap hit of $45 million next year. If you kind of don't want him necessarily, that's happening. You maybe you're out of the division. It's going to be somewhat a difficult division there. Like midway through the season, if you want to just write off some signing bonus money to Saquon, like maybe you could flip him midseason to a contender who's someone who wants to make like a Christian McCaffrey type of trade. And that's a lot of draft capital there. I don't know. I feel like that could have been a route that they went where it just covers them in all these different scenarios a little bit better. That downside scenario, you can move on from Jones. You probably have a high draft pick. You gain some more picks from Saquon Barkley, trading him out. People would understand trading Saquon in that circumstance. That would have been my way to like really raise the floor in this circumstance.
I think that does make sense. Yeah, you just don't give a big signing bonus and structure the contract in a different way, so there's not a ton of dead cap associated with it. Because teams aren't really trying to trade for guys on tags because, you can't extend a guy after July 15th. So midseason, a team basically is saying, I'm getting him for 8 games, and then I either have to extend him or he's gone. Extend him after the season, that is.
And the Giants don't want to trade him. They're not
Correct.
like, this is only like, I'm saying this is only a scenario, like Carolina, they're just like, what the hell are we going to do with this guy? That would be in that type of scenario where it's a lost season and they can still trade him at that point.
Right. No, I hear you.
So that would be my idea. I guess, I mean, I don't hate any of these deals necessarily, but it's tough. It's a little tough for the Carr and Jones contract being what you're getting for these guys. So we'll see what happens. I also think it's tough for Dable and Shane. Just, like, can you survive like a reboot post Daniel Jones as these guys? It seems difficult.
That's the thing, and like it is why it's unfortunate that they had the 26th pick, I want to say, in the draft. Like it totally took them out of the ability to, and maybe they could have gotten into the trade conversations or whatnot, but yeah, you'd think you'd buy yourself a longer runway. Again, talking about kind of perverse incentives and principal agent problem. Like if they did say, "Hey, we still don't believe in him. We want to figure something out and go a different direction," maybe the ownership would say, "Okay, until you get your quarterback, we're not going to kind of start your window. You've proven you're good at what you do based on this past season and getting more out of it than anyone expected coming into the year." But this is what keeps happening: is once there's a guy that's good enough, they just feel pigeonholed and feel they have to keep him around. And then, we have conversations about how to get out of the contract in a year or two.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see if we have those. I mean, I like Jones. I don't think he's bad.
He's fine.
He's just how he succeeded this year was like all these floor raising type of attributes. It was rushing, like adding the rushing there. Like, I don't think he's going to top that necessarily. I think this is near the higher end of how much rushing value he has, and just like really limiting the downside on a per drop back basis. The loss when it comes to interceptions, fumbles, and sacks, I think combined, I think he might have been the lowest on a per play basis there. So that's what drove for him, at least in my numbers, like an adjusted efficiency that was way, way up there. I mean, close to top 5 because he had so few negatives there, and he had little help when it came to wide receivers there. So maybe if he can, thread the needle a bit more as far as not having the fumbles like he did in the past, but also making some bigger plays, I do think there's some potential for him. But I put it into less likely than likely that he ends up paying off going forward. Okay, let's get into free agencies here. Free agency here. Let's start with the offensive side of the ball. And I guess let's talk quarterbacks for these guys who are left maybe first, or what may happen there. My whole analogy when it comes to these quarterbacks and when it comes to quarterback value and the bidding here is I have like this musical chair sort of thing where every offseason you have a certain number of chairs that are set up where you could potentially have a quarterback go. And as long as there are 2 chairs left, quarterbacks can get like really good value when it comes to signing like or trading for Carson Wentz and other people where that's happened early in the offseason. Where there are 2 chairs left, you think there might be this. Once there's 1 chair left, or the perception that, and there's kind of 1 chair left, the values go way down. Like that's like the Baker Mayfield situation at the end of last year, where there basically almost no chairs left, maybe 1 chair left. The Panthers weren't bidding against anyone. There was no reason for anyone else to get involved, that you can just get them for a very, very cheap deal. So we have teams who need quarterbacks. We have some that have hope of getting one in the draft. So they're maybe like partially in as being a chair there. Like, who do we have left that's in a non-bridge quarterback situation at this point? Maybe the Commanders were one team that I thought about that didn't have the highest pick, so they may not be able to get a quarterback. Is there anyone else really out there, though, at this point for the other quarterbacks who I think could become relative values going forward?
No, that's spot on. I think if the Jets thing with Rodgers happens, which it really seems like it will.
Yeah, I'm assuming that, which slots Jordan Love in to take one of those chairs, basically. Yeah.
It's at that point, it's literally just the Commanders and the Raiders. But I genuinely think the Raiders are just going to say Stidham in a draft pick. Like, why spend $20 million or $15 million on Jimmy Garoppolo when you can spend $5 million on Stidham, and then you're still probably going to try to take a kid in the draft or trade up in the draft or whatever. So I don't buy it on Carolina. Carolina's drafting a quarterback. Like both the Panthers organization and Frank Reich have tried the veteran route 15 times in the last 5 years. Like there's no way. And the last point on Garoppolo too, 2 people I respect who I know get good information or just know things. Joel Corey at CBS Sports and our old buddy Ari Meirov both think Garoppolo could get a really good deal. I've heard the opposite. I heard
I would bet the opposite. I would bet the opposite. It's just like you mentioned. You mentioned Washington. You mentioned Washington. Like, are they going to throw, a lot of money at Garoppolo? I don't think so. And then it becomes the Raiders who have a top 10 pick, the Panthers who have a top 10 pick. the Falcons, who have a top 10 pick, the Texans, who have obviously the second pick overall and almost guaranteed to draft a quarterback. So like everyone, he's going to be in this bridge quarterback sort of market. And we've seen, some questionable deals for the bridge quarterback market. Glennon, you're a Bears fan. You'll recognize that one that came over there, but that's not big money, and it's something you can get out of. So I think Garoppolo is going to be a deal. And I think a lot of times for these teams, and it's a similar sort of philosophy to all these different things. When I talk about like teams act based upon not wanting to regret something. When it comes to like signing Carr, signing Daniel Jones, signing some of these free agents early, if you can just wait and you can pay Jimmy Garoppolo half of what you're paying Derek Carr, I understand the injury concerns things, but Carr had a ton of injuries until about 2017 and then got better. I don't know if Garoppolo does anything fancy to like warrant getting a lot of injuries, but it's a concern. But I don't think it's enough of a delta to say that that's like a good move. But they don't want to regret not getting their guy. And like the draft, you want to regret not getting your guy. Whereas you can sit around and wait and eventually find someone, maybe like the Patriots did for Cam Newton. Now that didn't end well, but that looked really great when it first started. And they're able to get him basically for free. Because if you just wait until the end, all the chairs are gone. You can sign these guys who are almost equivalent or maybe slightly worse than guys that are signing earlier in the offseason.
That's my thing. If you're not going to do the big swing on a Rodgers type player, there's not no difference, but there's a marginal difference between a Derek Carr and a Jimmy Garoppolo. And I do think, Carr 2 years, 60. I think Garoppolo can be signed for 1 year, $15 million. Like literally, you said, half. So yeah, I agree with you there.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. I mean, maybe you'll end up in Houston. That seems like a place where, people just don't like him too, I guess, or I don't know. Maybe I'm always part of this Twitter bubble where I don't really know what the overarching opinion is. Like definitely within the kind of hip NFL analyst sphere, there's no like bigger groan probably if your team than going for Jimmy Garoppolo, even though whatever, I'm fine. I'm fine with Garoppolo there. Anything else quarterback wise? I know we're talking about Rodgers here and whatever, the Jets got to take a swing. I don't have anything like too, astounding to say re Rodgers. Anything else quarterback wise that you're hearing out there as far as what could happen? Because I know there's some inklings about, what will happen with Cousins or other people. I don't think anything else is going to happen. I don't think anything else would happen. Are you hearing anything?
Nothing big. A couple like little rumblings that, maybe Trey Lance, if Brock Purdy's surgery goes well, maybe Trey Lance does come available. But again,
what do you think Trey Lance could get? What do you think Trey Lance? I mean, I'm Mr. like guys don't lose their value, but I'm saying they don't lose their fair value. Like, I don't know what the fair value is for Lance at this point, being that he's definitely was drafted at the high end of what anyone would have expected that he was going to be drafted. I haven't heard like the greatest things about him in camp. He looked okay in preseason and other things, mostly because he would complete like 170-yard pass every other half that he was playing, and that was building everything. And then when he actually got into NFL action, other than the Houston Texans game, he hasn't looked good, really. And he's gotten injured. So for all those things together, what are we talking about the market for even Trey Lance would be at this point? It just seems like a tough pill to swallow potentially for the 49ers, other than the fact that they have third-round picks raining on them from all these compensatory picks.
That's the thing, is that it's so hard optically to trade up 2 first-round picks to go get him. And then from what I've heard, like a second-round pick would be on the table, but you're not going to get a first for him.
That's what I would assume. Maybe 2 seconds. Maybe you could get 2 seconds for him. I don't know where he is, like vis-a-vis Sam Darnold. I mean, Darnold should be a lot lower. Like the opinion should have been a lot lower on him, having so much more of a bad sample to him. But people like Darnold. I mean, people thought Darnold was the number 1 pick in that draft, where I don't think there's as many believers in Trey Lance necessarily throughout the NFL.
No, I don't. But I mean, Darnold got a 2, 6, and a 4, a second, a 6, and a future 4th. Like, you'd imagine Lance would get more, because that was also going into the 4th year of Darnold's deal, where this would be going into the 3rd year of Lance's deal.
Right.
So there's all those things. And then you can pick up the 5th year option, all that. So, maybe 2 2s. I would guess like a 2, a 3, and then like some day 3 stuff. Which, I mean, I think they're like the Raiders, like maybe consider that, with the Commanders, maybe consider that. Like you said, though, I think Darnold had like more the classic, like, let me get my hands on this guy, I can fix him, which is, guys talk themselves into with these quarterbacks sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, Darnold as a prospect, I mean, it's a little bit like maybe people don't remember because he didn't go number one. People really liked him a lot. I mean, if you were going to like have these draft guys rank order their favorite prospects from, 2015 to 2019, he might have been like number one amongst all these guys. I mean, maybe Winston was up there too. Wentz, a lot of people liked Wentz a lot, probably more than even liked Goff in there. And Murray, I don't think Murray was really close to what people thought about Darnold. So yeah, it's interesting to see that. One other guy that I am interested in, more so, like I just love getting some information and some evidence, is like I'm pretty interested in this Jordan Love thing because he's another guy where I feel like he hasn't shown much of anything, and I haven't heard necessarily great rumblings on him, but something over the last year. Did the Packers like really become more confident in him, and that's why they're wanting to wash their hands of Rodgers, which it seems like, or are they just sick of Aaron Rodgers?
I honestly think it's always hard to read the tea leaves. I kind of do think they have seen growth. Like you said, the early rumblings were not that good, and now even a couple
He was
players saying,
inactive
"Hey,
his entire rookie year, so that's like
right,
not good.
right,
Yeah.
all right." But yeah, I mean, and then you start hearing just kind of things about how teammates think he could be a starter. And yes, I'm sure part of it also is just being tired of dealing with Aaron Rodgers. But I think it's at least genuine to a degree. The interesting thing there is like we'll also know because in May, the 5th-year option deadline is due. If they hypothetically do trade Aaron Rodgers, do they truly double down by also picking up Love's 5th-year option, or do they take the risk of him just playing in his last year and not having that protection? Of course, the franchise tag would be there, but I think that'll be a big tell as well.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because like once Rodgers is gone, I think there'll also be a lot of tea leaves around how they build around here. Like, do they take a massive hit and try to trade like Bakhtiari or someone like that? Do they think about other guys, how they want to build out this franchise? And if they free up a ton of cap space, then maybe you could say, oh well, we'll 5th year him, and if he stinks, he stinks, and we'll have him as our like backup option going into next year. If he's good, we have like a decent player there. I think he's gonna stink, but I'm interested to see. I'm interested to see what will happen. I guess I'm not a big believer. I wasn't a big believer in him in the first place, and then I don't know. Like when you, I think if you're the Packers too, you probably have this idea after seeing like the Favre, Rodgers, Love thing that you're like, well, we had questions about Favre when we brought him in as a former. So we had questions about Aaron Rodgers. So they may like be a little bit skewed perception wise into like it doesn't happen. Like not everyone turns into a Hall of Famer eventually. And we'll see what happens there. All right, let's get to the other positions. And I'll get with you on this as far as the offensive positions. Wide receivers, maybe I'll start with some skill positions first. Is it as bad as everyone is saying?
Definitely. I mean, there's just not a lot of talent there.
Is there any hope, any ray of like hope? Let's talk when we talk about overvalued, undervalued. Is there any like particular player you could say, this is what I think he could sign for, and I could see why that would be a value?
I think for me that's DJ Chark, which might sound funny. I think he's going to get in the 10, 11 year per year range. And
Yeah.
he signed the 1-year, $10 million flyer last year, got hurt again for the first like half of the season, but he was really good down the stretch. The last, when they were winning games and almost made the playoffs, he was, his classic, 17 and a half yards per reception, stretching the field, doing the things he can do as a 6'4", 4.34 guy. And the reason why I think it could be a value is everyone's knocking this draft class at wide receiver also, which I get. And in particular, the one thing that does not have is there's just not speed really at this position. Maybe Quentin Johnson, which I guess is kind of like a Chark-esque player. But that's why I think if he stays healthy, he just brings an element that I think nobody else on the market brings. He's not going to sign for cheap, but I don't think he's going to sign, in today's NFL, $10 million a year is like wide receiver 3 money, not even wide receiver 2 money. So, I think it could be good value.
Do you think is this another is he still in the show me sort of category as far as 1 year versus longer? I mean, he already did that once, but he didn't really show much. He didn't have a chance to show much.
Yeah, I could see him wanting to get some more and kind of signing like an MVS type deal, a 3-year, 30 type of thing, or betting on himself again. He didn't show much, but again, it was more injury related as opposed to bad play. And then when he did play, he was pretty darn good. So it could go either way. These guys, they oftentimes, if he thinks like, hey, get one more good year, like a Juju, like goes back to back on the 1-year flyers, and the second time it appears to have worked. I guess we'll see how the market pans out. But so maybe he does go that route. But I also could see him just say, you know what, let's just take the 3 years, 35, which is what I have him at, and just get some more assurances, some more guarantees, and some more cash.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so what about on the flip side of the equation? Is this just like the Nicole Hardman discussion here? Because you
Yep.
didn't even have him ranked, I don't think, as in the free agency. And I think there's a good chance, maybe the best chance that he gets well, best chance, split amongst like 10 different guys who are vying for it. But I think he has a chance of someone talking themselves into a explosive guy. Maybe they put on like his rookie film and they're like, hey, that's like if we could get that going, maybe he could be the most overpaid guy of this cycle, the Christian Kirk of this cycle. I've been calling that for a while now. But what do you think about him as being an overpaid guy? Was he going to be your guy?
He was going to be my guy. You led me right there. Yeah, I've heard the same. I heard from multiple people in Indianapolis that he could probably top 10 million. I don't know how far he tops 10 million by, but I mean, the guy's the most explosive offense in the NFL with 5,000 passing yards a year. I think he's never had 600 receiving yards in a season. Yes, he's fast. That's awesome. That's great. That's about all he can currently boast. So I've heard that. I think it'll be a bad deal for whoever signs it. A small part of me is concerned the Bears could be that team.
Yeah, everyone's drawing that connection.
He played with Justin Fields, not even just Ryan Poles. He played with Justin Fields at Georgia. So it's a connection to both guys. And they are still kind of desperate for some speed in the slot in particular, and then have Mooney and Claypool on the outsides and just try to go, wisdom of the crowds at wide receiver and have a bunch of, 3 wide receiver 2/3s. But yeah, I think he's going to get a big deal, and I think it's going to not age very well.
I mean, if you look at what Fields does well, though, again, Ryan Poles is a listener, of course, so I'm gonna talk him into this bad deal. If you think about what Justin Fields does well, it's not necessarily like quick game, progressions, whatever. I don't know any of this stuff, but he takes a lot of sacks, so it can't be great in that regard. Maybe like dialing up stuff where you're scared of the run and then you could just toss it over the top. I mean, he throws an incredible ball, right? And incredibly strong arm. So I could see themselves talking themselves into somebody there. Maybe the Velus Jones is supposed to be that guy. And, that was a questionable pick in the same point. So I don't know if they still believe in him there, but maybe that'll be like the thought process if it does end up happening.
No, that is his game. He takes shots. He's a touchdown or check down mentality that needs to improve on the intermediate stuff. And like you said, I don't think he has an issue working through progressions. I think, or maybe the speed of which he does it is not great. I think he can do it, but he needs to speed the clock up a little bit. But yeah, as of right now, he is like you said, you can get away with some bombs over the top because teams are so worried about your run game, in particular with him. So it does make sense.
Actually, I shouldn't even say working through progressions. The one thing that I noticed in my very amateur film-based stuff, and I know this would get pointed out, so I'm like, I'm basically just saying whatever a color analyst is saying when they're watching a Bears game, is there are times where he even has on a first read what is kind of like an NFL open receiver, but he doesn't pull the trigger. So I don't know what that is. That's not really like a progression thing. It's like I still think I can do something better than that, maybe, or he just doesn't want to squeeze it in there sometimes. So maybe that's more of the issue here. So I shouldn't say progression because I don't know anything about his progression.
No, I think what it is like, look, the knocks on like ex-school quarterback is dumb. Obviously, they're all different players, but yeah, I mean, his receivers at Ohio State were wide open on every snap. Like there is NFL open and college open, and I do think that is an issue for him right now, which again he can improve on. But yeah, I think that's a bigger. He had plays where he was on his 4th progression. Like you could see him go through each thing. I think it's more like trust that your guy will make a play, which I guess also in his defense, maybe he shouldn't be trusting the guys they had last year to make a play. So
yeah. I mean, maybe too many progressions. Too many progressions.
Maybe.
That might have been. Yeah, I was watching some CJ Stroud the other day. Man, these dudes are just wide open. I mean, he throws a nice ball and he's accurate, but man, I'm a little concerned. I have to say I'm a little concerned about that without trying to be one of these guys that passed on Aaron Rodgers because Cal quarterbacks couldn't be successful back in the day. That was a whole thing. Anyone else wide receiver? Do you guys? Jacoby Myers is another guy that people talk about. I don't know how interested in the NFL in a 4.6 undrafted free agent type of guy.
I think he's going to be underpaid. Yeah, I mean, I have him at 16, and it's probably going to be too high. I think he's going to get like 13 to 14. And yes, I get, the athletic, the testing was not there. It's why he went undrafted. But the dude creates great separation, both on PFF data, other people's data I've seen. He gets open. He's also not just a slot guy. He plays a third of his snaps out wide. Like, he can do things different. The Patriots brought in like 4 different receivers by the draft, by trading for Devontae Parker, all these things, signing free agents like Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne, and Myers was the leading receiver both times, no matter what they tried to do. So I think he'll be underpaid. I'm not going to say you shouldn't get Christian Kirk money, but I think you should get 15, 16. And literally just because of draft status and things like that, he'll get, 12, 13, 14. I think it'll be a good deal.
Okay, and lastly, if we're moving on here, I guess I'll just bucket Beckham and Thomas in the same bucket, although there may be fewer injury concerns about Beckham, strangely, than there are about Thomas at this point. What do you think about like the guys who have been truly elite in the past for sustained periods of time? It wasn't just like a flash in the pan, even for Thomas, who are now in their late 20s. And like, can you sign these guys to anything but a prove it type of deal? And are there scenarios where that could work? I think maybe it can work in some scenarios as long as you're not like looking at your roster and checking and saying, okay, we got this filled, as long as more like you're approaching the wide receiver position more as you should, which is saying just because we have 3 good wide receivers, we're not like done at wide receiver, let's go ahead and like having an extra guy. If we have, I don't know how much it's going to cost though, 10, 15 million sitting around to bring him in for a year and go ahead and take that shot. Like, should teams be considering that?
Yeah, so the interesting thing with Thomas is I now do think it's possible he signs a new deal in New Orleans, actually stays. He basically has until March 18th to sign that new deal. Otherwise, they have to cut him because the way they structured the contract, would lock in a $32 million roster bonus in 2024, fully guaranteed if he doesn't yeah. So it's literally
that's a wild contract. Hey, go ahead.
Well, basically what you do is, I'll explain that real quickly. Why you did that is you put it super high because you can't renegotiate more than once in a single year if you're raising the money. But if you put it super high and then you go below that, you can do that more than so that people are making fun of them. I saw on Twitter people making fun of the Saints for doing that. That was intentional. You put it at super, super, super high because then you can negotiate below that. So anyway, I think that maybe gets done, which I was not expecting at all coming into the offseason. And then Odell Beckham, I mean, look, he's got a workout today at 2:30, which I don't think is usually a great sign when a guy puts on a public showing, but I think for him, like when he was trying to sign late last offseason, I think teams were concerned having not seen him play or even do a full-scale workout. And so he's one where if he looks good, he said himself, like he wants to sign a multi-year deal and plant roots somewhere for multiple years. So I think he's more likely to get more than just a one-year flyer of those two guys. Thomas, I think, would be a one-year prove it. I think Odell, it's not going to break the bank, but 10, 11 per year on a 3-year deal, something like that. The workout today will obviously, go a long way in seeing how he looks.
Yeah, just wait for the Dak restructure, Odell Beckham signing. That'll come. That'll be coming on the same day. I mean, is there any? Oh my God! You can imagine the grin on Jerry Jones's face if he has Beckham coming in there. He'd love that. He'd love that more than anyone.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, wide receiver is also a position that I generally just like don't see a lot of value in free agency by the analysis that I've done. Maybe we'll flip to one that I do see some value in, and that's the interior offensive line. What do you think about interior offensive line? I guess generally, do you kind of agree with me that these guys can be values? I think mostly because the franchise tag is just based across the entire offensive line, so you don't want to use those on interior offensive linemen unless they're like really elite guard type of prospects. What do you think about this class in particular?
I do. I think it's a good class. There's a lot of depth there. I think Dalton Risner with Denver will get a solid deal, but I think isn't going to break the bank. Maybe 8-9 million per year. Maybe someone goes bigger there, but I think that could be a solid value. I think Isaac Sumalo, because he has some injury concerns, the guy in Philadelphia who was phenomenal this past season, has started at both left guard and right guard and grades very well either spot. Is going to get maybe 11, 12, which I still think could be a decent value. I mean, Laken Tomlinson getting 13 last year, I thought was just too much. And it sounds like all these guys are going to come below that. One more that I'm just going to throw out there is kind of a deep sleeper, but that's what we're talking about. The values is I think Coleman Shelton from the Los Angeles Rams is interesting. Actually signed a 2-year deal last year, but had an opt-out if he played enough snaps. And he did. He hit that threshold. He played right guard last year after playing center and then flipped over to center when Brian Allen got hurt. So he can play both spots, and he's in that wide zone, infamous offense with Sean McVay. I think a lot of teams, I don't think he's going to sign a huge contract, but he's a pretty good player with positional flexibility. I think he's an interesting name to me.
That is an interesting name, and it's from an offensive line I would not expect based on their performance last year.
He was the only one who graded well last year of the entire group.
Yeah. It's a weak link. It's a weak link system. Let's get Eric Eager on there to tell us about why we shouldn't. But maybe that's like a low key way to find value. Is you look at really terrible
True.
like offensive lines generally, and knowing it's a weak link system, try to pick out the guys who may be passed over for the fact that they're just like, when you just think about watching Rams games and Stafford just getting pummeled all season long, that you wouldn't be like, well, I want some of that on our team. Tight end is somewhat interesting to me, but I feel like tight end is just the weirdest position because I think on veteran contracts for non-quarterbacks, if you're truly one of these elite guys, but the problem is there are just so few of them, might be the best deals in the NFL, like your Kelsey type of contracts, your Gronk contracts, all that time, your Kittle contracts. At the same time, like there's not really a great reason to spend early draft picks on them because they don't end up panning out a lot. And these guys who are more in the mid-tier sort of area, like I don't know what your upside is for a Dalton Schultz or an Evan Ingram or Mike Gesicki or these types of guys. Well, what do you think about the tight end position?
So the big thing here too is the draft class, not even just the top, even though I think it is one of the best, top of the class groups ever. It's also super deep, and all of them did great in Indy and probably boost their stock based on testing. So that will work against them. But yeah, like you said, the thing is the market is so suppressed that on an absolute value versus relative value basis, there's a lot of good value there. So I was going to say Gesicki is maybe the guy who gets a little bit too much.
Yeah.
I've heard totally mixed reviews there. You could get a lot. I've heard some people say he's not going to do very well. But I think there are some values. I think Austin Hooper is interesting to me. Austin Hooper's younger than like Schultz and Njoku, or not Njoku, but he's younger than a lot of these dudes coming up. We just think of him as old because he already had the veteran deal in Cleveland. He did not look good in his last year, but I thought bounced back well in Tennessee. He can actually block, unlike a lot of these dudes. And then there's kind of some interesting, like Irv Smith is interesting to me. He keeps getting hurt in Minnesota, but is talented and plays well when he does play. It's just he doesn't play very often.
Yeah. If any fantasy football players are listening to this, which I'm sure they are, Irv Smith breakouts. Let's just keep it going. Let's keep it rolling for the entire rest of his career. Yeah, I like the Hooper. Depending on how much they cost. Like if you could get a guy cheap, where it's like Hooper, Hayden Hurst, one of these guys. That's where I feel like the value is for tight end. It's like, okay, we can kind of like check a box, right? We can bring someone in without having to use a draft pick necessarily, a high value draft pick on someone, and check a box there. What do you think about Foster Moreau? I'm kind of interested in him a little bit. And he would be like ultra hyped if he had stepped up a bit more with Waller missing some time this last season, like he had sometimes in the past. But he's very young. He looked pretty good, I think, as far as being able to get down the field a decent amount. So maybe even stretch a defense a little bit with his athleticism. I'm just not sure what the contract will be there, but I could see him as being a guy where if you signed him to a 2 or 3 year deal, you might get some good value on the back end of that if he's able to step forward.
I could not agree more. And he was my guy coming into the offseason I thought would do better because there are a lot of these not the Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith level, but there's also a lot of guys you don't think about that go on to sign for $8-9 million per year. I thought he was going to be that guy, and he really just did not take advantage of the opportunity of Darren Waller not being there for pretty much the entire season. If he had a 700-yard season and 4 or 5 touchdowns, I think he is signing for maybe even $10 million a year. I think now you could get him at 7 or so, and I do think there is the potential. Maybe he was hurt or something we don't know about. Like you said, he can stretch the field a little bit. He's a good athlete. He's a solid blocker. He's not a great blocker, but he's better than, again, a lot of these other guys. He is probably one of my favorite. If he takes a step, I just he just missed this opportunity this past season.
Yeah. If I were going to make excuses for him, or context, maybe I should say, rather than an excuse for what happened with the last season, I do think the pie in total for Raiders passing attack went way down year over year. That's part of even though Carr got a big deal. So, but everyone's talking about Derek Carr like he was a top 12 quarterback after last season. And then you bring in Devontae Adams, where there's no one who's more of a pie hog than Devontae Adams. He's just taking all the targets there. True. So there's a little bit less to go around to everyone else there, and some of the other names are guys that can just suck up some targets too. So maybe I'll make that excuse for him because I've already decided that I like him. So I'll just keep doing confirmation bias, and I'll go in even further on him at this point. Let's keep it with the skill position a little bit here. What is a running back other than the guys who are getting franchise tagged here? I don't know what to think about running backs. I do think you could probably get some guys very cheap. But is there any value? I can't think of a guy who was signed to a lower level, mid-level veteran contract, which is a very cheap contract. Don't get me wrong. after their rookie year, not franchise, who really ends up doing that much on the next team?
I think it's only your scat back receiver type guys that sometimes pan
Yes.
out
Okay.
on
I'll agree
those.
with that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but I hear you though. Like this guy's a good early down runner. You can get him for 4 million, and then it's like, yeah, like he's done. Like he's not, there's not a lot of juice left. So, in that vein, the one guy I think I guess could fit that bill. Again, health is the main concern, but like Rashad Penny, when he's healthy, is a good early down running back. And I think because of the injuries, he's not going to get that much. So I think he's a potential value. But then, yeah, like the Jerick McKinnons of the world, like, I just talked about, like he maybe is a solid signing because he's not going to get a ton. Also has an injury history. It obviously hasn't cropped up recently, but a good receiver, a good pass blocker this past year in Kansas City, I think to a degree. Those things help a little bit, especially, in the contract realm. But I think the franchise tags and the pay cuts for all these guys, like the market's not going to be that strong. I think Miles Sanders might get a decent deal, and I think that could be an overpay. Like the Leonard Fournette last year, where they give it to him, it seems good, and then they cut him a year later.
Yeah. No, Sanders was going to be my guy for being overpaid. Again, it's like rising tide lifts all boats sort of situation. Yeah. You're coming off of that Eagles offense. That's just gonna happen sometimes. All right. And then rounding out here, I guess tight end would be another, a tight end, tackle would be another position where generally I don't see a lot of value there, but we're going to have a big contract for Orlando Brown at least. I don't know about like Caleb McGarry and guys who are more run blockers, what they'll be viewed on the free agent market, or Mike McGlinchey is another guy where is interesting because of draft capital behind them, stuff like that. Do you think generally these guys can be good signings? Like, well, what do you think about, I guess, Brown first, because he's going to be by far the marquee guy?
Yeah, no, Brown I think is going to get 20 plus, and I think he's a good, not great tackle. So, look, you're going to overpay for tackle production in free agency. That's a given. Like, forget the other positions. Like that's just going to happen. I think he won't play up to that level, but I don't think he's going to be terrible. The ones I'm concerned about, I think Mitch McGarry. I think Caleb McGarry is going to get paid too much money. You look at his true pass set stuff with us, and it's just simply not good. He was in the run heaviest and play action heaviest offense last year in his kind of true breakout, and it still was more of a, always a good run blocker. He was an elite run blocker last year, but still not a great pass protector. McGlinchey, kind of same thing. Juwan Taylor is going to get a massive deal, and he does show up very well in our true pass set and just pass protection metrics. I think he's probably the only potential value. Oh, not value, but potentially the guy that gets the big deal and actually plays up to it, I think could be Juwan Taylor. The one value I see, kind of another deep cut, but Jermaine Illuminor, been around for a while, floated around rosters, the Patriots for a little bit. Played very well this last year for the Raiders, with his buddies from New England. Has some positional flexibility, can play guard a little bit, can be a swing tackle to a degree. You probably only want him on the right side, but not going to get a huge deal. And was really, really good last year. Again, no matter how you break it down, not getting boosted up by kind of fluky stuff. Played really well last year in Las Vegas.
Yeah, no, I like him. It'll be interesting to see. It's like that's a price sensitive one for me. I feel like if you can get like a good swing tackle potential guy, like that's a valuable role to have in an NFL offense. Like you're not swinging for the fence in free agency, but if you're going for that, I like that one. All right, let's flip over to the defensive side of things. At least by these projections that I've done, and I'm not going to say that the greatest projections ever, the reliability of it, but Javon Hargrave is so head and shoulders above anybody as far as the value that will be added. So, but he's going to get paid also on this here. Do you think it's possible? What do you think about paying for at least in my opinion, the one truly elite, maybe difference making sort of player here? I know some people may look at some of the safeties and other stuff, but I guess that's just not there's just more supply in that type of position. So what do you think about Hargrave as someone who can rush the passer, from the interior?
Very, very well. It's the last couple of years he's been just below, Chris Jones and Aaron Donald, and a ton of not just grades, but pass rush win rate, pressure percentage, actual just pressures, all those things. So he's asking for about $20 million a year. I think he'll come in just below that unless one team just has to go over the top and get that done. Gonna be 30 next year. I think he is a very, very good player. It's gonna be tough to play up to that level, but I would rather do that than. I like Draymond Jones. I've always liked Draymond Jones personally. Even in college, thought he was a stud, but he's going to get $17-18 million a year. And I just think I don't know, younger obviously than Hargrave and can take some strides. I think he might shift from a 3.4 to a 4.3 depending where he goes. Maybe that helps him. I don't know. I think he's struggles against the run. That would be even worse in an even front versus an odd front. But again, I always liked him. But I had him at 15 to start the offseason. I heard he could get 18. It's a bit much.
Yeah, yeah. I think I agree with that. I mean, I'm just interested in Hargrave, but it's also one of those situations where I guess I would want an out in case like a cliff comes that you don't know about. And maybe there's some concern. I mean, I think the grading helps parse this out a little bit, but maybe there's some concern where you have like a besieged offensive line on the other side that certain guys can kind of sneak through a little bit more often than they would if he's going to go someplace else who presumably doesn't have a lot of upfront pass rushing talent, how they can play out there. Edge here. I mean, you got clown. You got guys. You got some of these old heads out here, like Melvin Ingram or Justin Houston or Clowney to a degree. Clowney's not that old, but he's been around forever there. I mean, I think like all these guys could be decent as long as you don't tie yourself in for more than a year. I kind of think like old edge for a very short term, you're not completely reliant upon them. Kind of like what Houston was last year, can be a little bit undervalued. What do you think?
There's been a ton of great values. All those guys you mentioned, Brandon Graham as well. Also, Jerry Hughes was great in Houston last year. Always been a good guy, good. So like, there's been a ton of good values there. It's an awful class though overall. Like if you're looking for a multi-year fix, there generally might not be one. I think Yannick Ngakoue is going to get paid too much because of sack production. Very specific player. He's a wide 9 rusher that can get sacks. Is I think at least 8 every year of his career. Obviously we say how fluky that is. It is, but maybe some guys are finishers or whatever, we want to say, but he'll probably get too much in my opinion. I think there are a couple interesting cheaper options. Agbania Okoronkwo in Houston had a phenomenal end of the year. He finally became an actual starter, playing more snaps, and the production honestly rose, did not dip at all. Probably, in my opinion, fits better as an outside linebacker than a D end, but an interesting player to me. I think Charles Omenihu in San Francisco is interesting. Arden Key is kind of an inside-outside flex guy. With Jacksonville, I think they want to bring him back, and that might happen. But those guys is more the market I'm in. You're trying to spend like $8 to $10 million. Samson Ebukam, another guy from San Francisco. But there's no obviously the marquee guys don't really work out that often, but there's none of those guys out there. Marcus Davenport, 1-year flyer. Maybe he stays healthy. He's always, all his numbers are great. He just has, I don't think he's ever played 500 snaps in a season. So you have to know that as well.
Yeah, I think this might be like saving them from themselves, some of these GMs,
Yeah.
the fact that none of these guys are actually available in this draft. Okay, so we're talking more off-ball linebacker here now with Bobby Wagner also being thrown into the mix here versus I'm looking at some older projections that I have here. Do you see any value here? Because when we talk about Wagner, we talk about Levante David, we're talking about elite players who are old. I don't know what an aging curve is like for off-ball linebacker. I think it might be okay, but again, it's like, can you rely upon these guys for more than a year? But maybe you don't really need to.
It's generally pretty steep. A lot of these guys can fall off. I mean, the guys like David's still a phenomenal player. I think when you're that cerebral and your instincts are that good and you just know where to go, it can kind of help you overcome some of the physical limitations that develop. But yeah, this is probably the heaviest position in the entire free agency if I had to say. And then you add in Eric Kendricks, you add in Bobby Wagner. I think David will do well. I think David's going to get over $10 million a year, but I would imagine it's 1-year stuff for Wagner and Kendricks. I think that Edmonds is going to get a gigantic deal, maybe $18, $19 million a year. I think Bobby Okereke at this point gets around $10 million a year, but there's so many names, Leighton Vander Esch and Drew Tranquill. And I could go on forever. The only values I see here, I don't know what Kaiser White doesn't get enough love. He's a solid coverage back. I'm not saying he's a great player, but a solid coverage backer. Got a 1-year, $3 million deal from Philly last year with some incentives. Played well. He did fine. But I think he'll be in that range again. And then another deep sleeper that I find fascinating is Caden Ellis with the New Orleans Saints, who basically seventh round pick for them, had basically not played at all until this year. And he's an interesting like Kyle Van Noy type where like they played him in off ball. They also like brought him down and had him rush the passer for 100+ snaps this year and looked really, really good. Kind of in all those facets, like literally has like 700 NFL snaps on it total over 4 years. But one of those guys that maybe, you get him for $4 or $5 million a year and, just like takes that next step somewhere else. And we're talking about him, down the road.
So overpaid here. I was thinking Edmonds was my So that guy I was thinking for overpay.
Oh yeah.
But what about TJ Edwards? I thought maybe he's someone who's going to get a decent bag, but I'm not. I don't know. I'm not sure.
I think he'll get like 10 to 12 range, but his range is ginormous. Like you talk to people that
Okay.
think you can
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
like 6 or 7, and some people tell you get 14. Like it's so wide. His big knock was you couldn't play him on third down. You couldn't use him in coverage. He did take strides in that regard this year. I don't think he's what you want him to do is like manning up on tight ends or wide receiver threes or running backs or anything like that. Um, but he's not a total liability, especially if you're a zone heavy defense, which obviously Philly was. But yeah, he is the widest range of any free agent I've talked to people in the entire free agency class. His range is the widest.
Yeah, because he was the other guy that I think has potential when we look back to be like the most overpaid guy. I'm just not sure if he's going to get the pay. Whereas I know,
right.
I know Edmonds is going to get the bag, so that makes it like a safer
Mm-hmm.
call to say that
Mm-hmm.
that he's going to be that person. Safety. Now, safety again. There's just a ton of dudes out here. Well, not a ton of dudes, but there's some dudes. Some of them somewhat older though. I guess when we're talking about Poyer and McCourtney and all those McCourtney and all those guys. What do you think about and Jimmy Ward? God, these guys are older than I thought. What do you think about safety? And I guess everyone's gonna be talking about Jesse Bates in this regard.
He'll get a big deal. I don't know if I would say it's an overpay.
A lot of old dudes. Oh my god, I'm looking through here. There's so many old dudes.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
I know. Like Rodney McLeod and it's a lot of old dudes. There's also a lot of young guys. It's always a flooded market. It's always I don't say suppressed, but it's hard to do very well in free agency because there's always a ton of options. But just like I mentioned earlier with I think linebacker, the safety or whatever it was, the safety draft class also stinks. Like there's maybe 1 or 2 guys that go in the first round, and even after that, like there's not a lot of talent there. So that could help them. I think there are values here though. So I'm a big Donovan Wilson fan from the Dallas Cowboys. A guy that can play forward, can rush the passer, almost kind of like a hybrid linebacker type player. Not quite, but in that mold of some of those guys that you can play out in the box, you can do a lot of different things with, and not a liability in coverage. Not a great coverage player, but not a liability. There's your Julian Love and Juan Thornhill and those guys of the world. But anyway, I think Deshaun Elliott and Detroit could be a good value. John Johnson getting cut by the Browns maybe doesn't get that big of a deal. Still a young player that was very good at a time. Like it's just safety. There's just so many options, and it's kind of hard to peg who gets paid and who doesn't. I feel like I'm forgetting name like Taylor Rapp with LA, Nick Scott with LA. I think is a good player. There's just and all these guys are falling in like the 5 to 9 range. There's 15 guys that might sign for in that range.
Okay, so let's talk about Bates then, because he's going to be the name. I mean, is he going to get like a Marcus Williams sort of deal, considering how thin it is?
I think he'll get right around there, 15, 16 instead of the 14 per year over 5 was Marcus Williams. I think Bates gets just a hair above that.
I mean, God, the Ravens, I respect the Ravens, but it really goes against my like just general like base rate philosophy to be paying dudes this much. But hey,
they've spent resources at non-premium positions.
I know testing.
They drafted a safety and a center in the first round last year too, on top of the Williams deal. I think that, by the way, random, but the trade for the Jets yesterday to get Chuck Clark for a 7th, I thought was a great trade for the Jets. He's a good player.
Yeah, also allowed Schefter and others to tease the trade and then come through with that afterwards. All right, corner is another position where I don't know if you're getting elite play, but when these guys switch teams, sometimes you get like it's basically really you're just shaking it up and you have all these different outcomes you can get and you throw it against the wall. And sometimes you find guys who were done. They're like done someplace else. I'm thinking maybe like Xavier Rhodes type, maybe even a Patrick Peterson type, where they're done and then they go someplace else and it's like, maybe they're not as done as we thought they were. Is that what you're looking for here, or are there guys that you're really going to want to drop a bag on in this class?
I think the scheme changes are big. So the guys you mentioned basically went from more man heavy to playing more zone, and it helped them with their loss of athleticism. On the flip side, he's going to get a massive deal. But Jamel Dean has said many times, like, I want to play more press coverage. I want to play more man. And Tampa Bay with Todd Bowles has been very zone heavy. I don't think it's been a great fit for his skill set. And when he does play press coverage, his grades for us are phenomenal. His yards per coverage snap, all those, advanced metrics look good. In particular when he's playing in those alignments. So he could be, I think, an example of a guy that like you go somewhere else and you're very good because I think it's a better fit for you. The crazy one to me is I had Byron Murphy at like $9 million a year, and Tom Pelissero came out yesterday and he does this article every year where he says like 7 to 10 pending free agents that could get more than you expect. So he doesn't talk about, like, the Javon Hargraves and whatever of the world.
Yeah,
It's kind of just below that. I think he says unheralded, and it's like, it's guys that you should know. But anyway, he said Byron Murphy could also get like 14, 15, 16 a year, which is insane to me. He's a good player, early draft pick, early second round pick. He does have inside outside flexibility. He can play man and zone, do a lot of different things. But if someone pays him $15 million a year, I think that is going to be a bad contract. The value for me is he coming off an ACL tear, which stinks, but Emmanuel Mosley was looking really good in San Francisco, signed a short-term extension a couple years ago. I thought he was going to, maybe sign like a significant multi-year extension if he stayed healthy. Now maybe you get him on a one-year flyer, kind of like Jason Verrett in San Francisco, where he signed 1 year, $4 million and had an awesome season. Like, I think Mosley could do that as well, coming off the ACL tear, and then you get great value if he stays healthy.
What about someone like Bradbury? Is he, I don't know where he falls into the spectrum of like post hype. Is he in that category, or is he still hype? Is he still going to get a big deal?
I think we'll get like 2 years for $11 or $12 million a year. So definitely CB2 money. Not going to get some big old bag. I mean, he was the clear CB2 to Darius Slay this past year. A good player that they're a perfect example where like he was playing a man heavy scheme in New York with Patrick Graham. I mean, he played fine, but they caught him. I think they thought, he should go to a little bit more off coverage. And Philadelphia, like, does not play press that much at all. Or at least they didn't with Jonathan Gannon. And I think it's why he made the Pro Bowl and had a bounce back really good year. He's a good player. Was super, super high in forced incompletion rate. I've kind of started to look at, depending on what you play, but not always a good signal. And oftentimes can mean you're getting targeted a lot, which is probably not exactly a good thing. But does show up in a lot, a lot of metrics this past year. So yeah, mid-tier, 10 or 12.
Yeah. I mean, he's an interesting guy, and I'll be very price sensitive on it. But I do think a lot of times in free agency, and I mentioned this for different positions, where there's wide receiver, definitely for cornerback, like there's too much paying up for the perception of solidifying something where, sorry, it just doesn't exist in the NFL period, but it really doesn't exist in free agency where you have guys switching teams and everything else. Like, they're just not that solid. Like, everyone should kind of look at and downgrade their thoughts on how like set you are at a particular position when you're bringing someone in free agency. And then maybe it would kind of narrow the ranges of what guys are getting paid, which I think would benefit teams a little bit more here. All right. I think we've done it all. We've said it all. Kickers, you want to get we got some kicker takes for me?
I do. I know Matt Gay is a free agent, so there's a name. That just came to me.
Post hype. I like post hype kicker.
Actually, Robbie Gould.
Like a Robbie Gould. Yeah, Robbie Gould.
Yeah, there you go.
Post-hype kicker. Let's go. I don't even know what a post-hype punter looks like, but those guys are getting drafted a little bit more often. So I want to hear about punt. People love the punters that come out of the draft. Okay, Brad, I know you got to get going pretty soon. I'm going to let you go here. But before I do, what do you want to plug? What's going on? Are you going into a bunker for the next week to just digest all this different news going on? What's happening?
Yeah, so
if you want to drop some breaking news too, if you want to drop some breaking news right here, then
I put out Gino's incentives yesterday. I was first. I, of course, got no credit from Mike Garofalo. For some reason, he never wants to give me credit. But anyway, everything I just talked about, we have our PFF's top 200 free agents. I have contract projections for every single guy on there. And I'll be in Cincinnati live in studio covering free agency. So, keep an eye on that next Monday through Wednesday when all the big deals come in. I'll be covering them all.
You're the free agency guy. You're the guy. You're the contract guy. You are the important stuff. Let's face it. Like these prospect evaluations, it's all nonsense.
The cash. It's about the cash.
It's all nonsense. This is cash money here, sort of stuff here. Well, thank you, Brad, for joining me. I know this is a very busy time for you, so I appreciate it. I think this would be truly highly, highly informative for everyone out there. Follow Brad at PFF_Brad, right? Follow him on Twitter. Get all the PFF stuff. I know I'm no longer there, but I'm subscribed. I'm in there. I'm stealing all their information and all of Brad's contract projections, and then also mocking them and stealing them at the same time if they don't align with what I think. So
you were right. Hey, credit to you on Gino. You were right.
I know. I should be taking some victory laps on that.
You should take a victory lap. I agree.
It's already over though. Like no one cares by this point.
Yeah, we got Schultz. We got Schultz. All I'm trying to do the next week is not get Schultz. That's our new catchphrase. Just don't get Schultz.
Maybe getting Schultz is good though, because let's face it. Like if you victory lap, no one remembers that the lap was a fraudulent lap. You still got the lap.
Yeah, 100%. It was too late. I got Yeah. So that's true. That's true.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me, man. Always good to talk to you, whether on here or otherwise. And take it easy. All right.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.